Welcome. This is Jordan with Foodbevy, the online community for food and beverage founders. And today I'm talking with Renee, founder of Amazi Foods. And Renee, welcome. Let's get started right from the beginning. So I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about yourself, the product and the company, and how you got started.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. Again, I'm excited to chat. So Amazi was the inception of Amazi began about 4 years ago. I studied abroad and did my thesis research in Uganda. And while I was there, I enjoyed many of their tropical fruits and was certainly abreast to the world of fair trade, ethical sourcing, but was finding that sort of was leaving this big gap in our supply chains, wherein the countries at the resource level were always at the resource level. Like they were totally disconnected from the processing, the innovation, the entire supply chain, and all the value that goes along with that. So many of these developing countries, especially Uganda, super entrepreneurial, but very, very high unemployment, not a lot of business opportunity, not a lot of market access, not a lot of high value jobs. And so for me, it's kind of like, okay, you have all the resources here. You have all the sort of eagerness to want to be connected. It's just, that's not there. So I decided to take a risk and was like, okay, well, I'll just start this brand that sells 100% made in Uganda products. And of course, that was a big statement at the time. And since then, we've worked to build our supply chain and now have two product lines. They are plantain chips and jackfruit chews, and they're all 100% plant-based, just 3 ingredients or less, but offering some really unique textures and flavors in what I think is sometimes a boring category of dried fruit. So we're aiming to bring these like really healthy, unique products, but they're all sort of with the promise of building sustainable supply chains as well.
That's awesome. So it sounds like you picked a super easy business model.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been very, it took like, people always ask me like, do you have any advice? I'm like, don't do it. No, it was certainly, this is not the model to do if you want to quickly exit. Like if you want to grow fast and exit, this is not what I recommend. But it's been super fulfilling and exciting in other ways. It really did take from the ground up. Like I'm also new to the food industry, so not only was I learning all the typical things that new food entrepreneurs are learning, but I was also having to literally build production that didn't really exist prior.
Yeah, so talk about that, because I know you work with your partners in Uganda to kind of build out the supply chain, build out the facilities to manufacture your products. Like, what was that process like? Because I know it's hard enough doing so here in the US, so you had to do so on another continent.
Yeah, there's been many challenging puzzle pieces along the way, but I think the first sort of model that I used was similar to a co-packing model. I found a company that was making dried fruit in Uganda. And so what I did was I worked with them to basically find new farmers to add to their network in the products that I wanted to use. And then from there, skills building on not how to they were simply drying and exporting in bulk. So from there, kind of how can we add the spices, or, I helped invest in an oven for their facility, things like that, to do different methods of food processing that would appeal to the US palate and open up higher value options. And so early on, it was sort of a glorified co-packer relationship in that I sort of used their facility. I told them how to make the product, but it was very much like, let's do this together. And, as we started to grow and requests from larger retailers started to come in, I knew that partnership was just not robust enough and not transparent enough for us to have that level of control and impact, and also just QC that we were hoping to have. We had a lot of issues with QC in the first few years. And as you can imagine, like sometimes if you have a quality issue, like at the early stages, you can like go back to the kitchen, make another batch. But when you have to travel thousands of miles, fixing that is rather challenging. So we ultimately found amazing partners who wanted to open up a facility dedicated to our products. And it is really exciting because it's also right now the like highest quality production facility in Uganda. And so they are like 100% committed to our products. We know their farmers groups. We, have similar stakeholders. So we also know the numbers that are going into it. We know if people are getting paid enough. We know the employees there. So it's really amazing to have now that level of connection between the facility and us on this side.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great relationship that you've been able to cultivate and build. And as we know as founders, it takes a little bit of trial and error until you find that correct relationship that can actually grow and scale with you in the right way. So I know your brand is chugging along, and 2020 January, February probably looked like it was going to be an awesome year, and then COVID happened. So talk about the effects that's had on your business, especially having product that's manufactured and shipped from another continent.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year for sure. And I know everyone has their own story. For us, it was meant to be this really big growth year because we had just gotten into our largest account, into Sprouts Market. We had just onboarded with KeHE. We were getting ready to lean pretty heavily into retail. And then, a lot of the paths that we were exploring got sort of stalled or, how the retail scene was changing. So we already did have an e-commerce presence, but really focused on leaning into that, re-strategizing. We relaunched our Amazon listings. So we previously were using a third-party seller, for example, and now we're able with the new manufacturers too, like we have now higher quality product, we have better pricing. So we relaunched our Amazon listings to be more appealing and are now leaning into that as well. Challenges internally, it did include some reworking of the contractors that we were using. We decided to get more kind of gritty on our operation side. So we were previously contracting a lot of that out and decided to take it in-house, and we're just kind of keeping it really scrappy. Marketing, I took it into my own hands. I previously had someone that was working part-time. And the biggest challenge that we're seeing, and we don't know what the long-term effects are my ability to go to Uganda and like meet with our partners and which is really important to me. The great news is that we do have a strong relationship now and we can trust them. But getting over there to do any sort of product development is hard. And then more than that is, as you can imagine, freight has been a bit of a nightmare over the past few months, and we've seen rates increase pretty scarily. So it's just interesting that we've started to try to get creative in what freight methods and routes we can take, and it does take some reworking of production timing, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to find ultimately a model that results in similar cost of goods to what we had anticipated. So that's been interesting. But
Yeah, definitely understand that. While working at home and taking on a lot of this work yourself, have you found any particular software or services or partners that you've been able to kind of leverage to kind of help extend your reach and how much you're able to do, or any like favorite tools you use?
I mean, I have always kept a fairly scrappy team, and I find that that's actually been great. I have someone who works part-time on like our order fulfillment and operations behind the scenes, customer management, things like that. And just having her to support has been really helpful. I have some advisors and mentors who've made some great connections with people who've been willing to do like hour-long consultations on our website, or give feedback on what they thought our Instagram was looking like and if there's anything we could be doing better. things like that. And of course, my dad actually has been very involved in the Uganda relationship. So he's been helping a lot with the freight research side of things because that is not my field house. And so just really, I think just tapping into the people that I already have and just finding that, you know, especially at this time, I'm finding that I'm willing to help, other people are willing to help. And so just leaning into collaboration whenever possible has been very helpful.
Looking over the next year, I know you mentioned having to change some of your goals and priorities. Are you expecting your business to change over the next year, and what adjustments are you making in terms of your strategic plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, certain things in terms of how quickly we expect it to grow with regards to volume, especially, which has implications for our production partners. Just because we were anticipating, again, like leaning pretty heavily into retail, which, as we know, like not always the smartest move in terms of your margin, but generally will move volume more quickly than, you know, if you're starting to build up your e-com, depending on how much cash you have. And, you know, for us as a brand who doesn't have that much cash, the road to building up e-commerce and Amazon can take a little bit longer. But, you know, sort of long tail-ish, like I think we will end up doing the amount of business similar to what we had anticipated. It's just we're delayed by like 5 months or so. But I do think that, again, like relaunching our Amazon and reworking the entire pricing model around that. We've also reduced the number of SKUs that we're offering, and just really paying attention to what the best sellers are, what really is moving, what region we're focusing on. So I think it's just a call to get a little bit more specific and be a little bit more patient in the growth. And for me too, like one thing that I should have always been doing, but have really been doing, is like a weekly cash flow. So just forcing me to kind of have that foresight and make decisions accordingly. So that's certainly been it. You know, it's sort of more of the little tweaks that we've been able to do. And I think part of that is because, you know, we are a small brand that was just like on the cusp of making a lot of investments. And it was great that we were able to sort of pull back a little bit early, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think the weekly cash flow is definitely a tool that every founder should be using, because that relationship to cash is so important, even though it can be really scary.
I know some people do like a daily. I feel like I can't look at that, but it's helped me. You know, it's still not fun to look at, but it does take away some of the barrier I had around it. And I think too, just being realistic, like, hey, we have a 3-month runway, or like, hey, we have a, you know, so what are we going to do to like make that longer? Or what am I going to do? Can I negotiate payment terms? Can I count on, be more aggressive with this account, you know, and sort of just using that to help make some of my decisions.
So I know you joked with this a little bit at the beginning, but if you were to give a founder or someone who is aspiring to be a founder a piece of advice based on your experiences, what would you tell them?
I think I've had a bit of a unique experience, and I think this is sort of the advice. It's like everybody has their own journey, right? So like, again, it's taken us 4 years to get to this point, and I don't think that most people starting a business like necessarily take that long to get to our stage or like our size per se. And I think I used to get really down on myself about that, like just being like, we should be so much further ahead than we are. But, you know, as we talked about before, like our supply chain looks totally different than yours does. Like I can't set the same benchmarks for myself and my business that someone else is setting for theirs. And sure, it's important to be aware, and it's important to like be, you know, setting deadlines for yourself of sorts. But I think that for me, one of the biggest lessons that I always have to relearn is just like knowing when to have my blinders on, knowing like, you know, as we were talking about a bit before we started recording, like this is a really collaborative, it can be a very collaborative space. So, you know, instead of worrying about other people's success, like let them have their success, and, you know, let's keep trucking forward towards ours is sort of something that I always have to remind myself of. Yeah.
Love that advice. Renee from Amazi Food, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It was super fun.